If you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? Not in a story, not in a dream. I mean for real. When your hands are frostbitten, your heart's torn in two, and the snow outside could bury a man standing. When love doesn't come with flowers or lace, but with shame, danger, and a promise to burn every bridge you've ever walked. What would you choose then? I used to think I knew the answer. I was raised proper. Church on Sundays. Keep your hands folded. Don't speak to strangers, especially not the wrong kind. But that winter in Devil's Pass, showed me how easily a heart can betray its own rules. Her name was Naomi Cutter, just 23, but already twice as hardened by life as most folks twice her age. She wasn't supposed to end up alone in the mountains. She was supposed to be married by Christmas to a rancher in Golden Ridge she'd never met, but whose letters were fine, polite, full of promises. A fresh start, the papers said. A new life, a new name. She left her father's crumbling farm in Missouri with a prayer on her lips and frost already biting the edge of her boots. But the mountains don't care about prayers. The stagecoach left Laramie 3 days before the worst blizzard in 20 years. 6 passengers, 1 driver, and a load of mail, and a woman with a suitcase full of hope, heading toward a man she didn't know and a future she'd agreed to out of desperation. Naomi sat by the window, her gloved fingers tracing the fogged-up glass, watching the landscape disappear under a white veil. She didn't speak much, just clutched that Bible in her lap like it was the only friend she had left. Somewhere near Devil's Pass, the wind turned cruel, the kind of wind that feels like it's got teeth. Horses bucked, visibility dropped. Then came the crack, not thunder, not lightning, but the snapping groan of ice and axle. The stage tipped once, twice, then tumbled. They say most accidents in the mountains kill fast. This one didn't. Naomi woke with blood on her temple and snow in her mouth. The driver was gone, his seat empty, scarf caught on a tree like a ghost had slipped free. One of the horses had broken its leg and was crying in that horrible, high-pitched way animals do when they know the end's coming. 3 passengers dead, 1 unconscious, 1 gone entirely, and Naomi alive. Barely. She pulled herself from the wreck, teeth chattering, hands blue, legs stiff as fence posts. The snow was still falling, but slower now, like feathers drifting down from a torn pillow in the sky. No shelter, no sign of rescue, no path forward. She could have died right there, but someone was watching her. From the edge of the trees, half hidden by the blizzard, stood a figure. Not a man. Smaller, cloaked in furs with eyes that didn't flinch in the cold. Naomi blinked, thought maybe her mind was slipping, but the figure didn't vanish. Instead, it stepped forward, and that's the first time Naomi saw her. Ahyoka. No name was spoken, not yet. No words passed. Just movement, calm, efficient, urgent. The stranger knelt beside her, checked her limbs, her breath, then pointed toward the trees. Naomi didn't argue. What was there to argue with? Death? Cold? Pride? She followed, limped, fell, was caught. Through the trees, deeper than Naomi would have dared alone, they walked, until a low log cabin emerged like a secret stitched into the land itself. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Inside it was warm, dim, smelling of pine resin and herbs Naomi couldn't name. Ahyoka said nothing. She built a fire, hung a pot, laid out blankets. Then she handed Naomi a mug, something bitter and hot that burned all the way down. Only then did she speak, and only 2 words. "You safe?" Her voice was low, shaped like stone smoothed by rivers. Naomi wanted to say thank you, or ask where she was, or even cry, but none of that came. Just silence, and the soft whistle of the wind battering the door. That night, Naomi dreamed of fire and snow, of being carried in arms stronger than hers, and of eyes that saw through every lie she'd ever been told. And somewhere, under those layers of wool and shame, something thawed, something dangerous, something forbidden, something she'd been taught to fear, but could no longer ignore. If you had to live with a love the world condemned, could you still call it love? That was the question Naomi would carry like a splinter in her soul, long after the bruises faded and the snow melted off the windowsill. Because in Devil's Pass, what begins as survival doesn't always stay that way. The morning came slowly. Pale light slipped between the wooden slats of the cabin, cutting through the warmth like a knife through butter. Naomi opened her eyes to the smell of cedar smoke and something earthy boiling in the pot. Her head ached. Her lips were cracked. But she was alive, and she wasn't alone. Ayoka sat by the fire, legs folded, stirring something with a carved wooden spoon. She didn't look up, just kept her hands moving like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Naomi watched her in silence, wondering what kind of woman lived alone in the middle of nowhere, building fires for strangers in the heart of winter. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was careful, like 2 deer in the same clearing, unsure if they could trust the other not to bolt. Ayoka finally looked up, and their eyes met, brown on blue. Stillness met question. And the question wasn't, "Who are you?" or "What happened?" It was deeper than that. Older. "Why are you running?" Ayoka asked. Naomi opened her mouth, closed it again. What could she say? That she was running from a future she never chose. That her whole life had been a series of good girl choices, none of which belonged to her. That the man she was supposed to marry had written letters that sounded like contracts instead of dreams. Instead, she asked, "Why are you here?" Ayoka stirred the pot once more. "Because the world outside wanted to erase me, and I refused." That was the first real truth between them. For the next few days, the snow made decisions for them. Roads vanished. Trees bent under the weight of it. The outside world stopped knocking. Inside the cabin, 2 women became something else, something not yet named. They didn't talk much, not at first, but Naomi watched the way Ayoka moved, quiet, deliberate, always watching the wind and listening to the land like it had something to say. She knew how to stretch a rabbit into stew, how to grind roots that soothed pain, how to read the tracks of birds even in falling snow. Naomi, by contrast, had grown up in silence, not the kind that comes from nature, but the kind that lives in houses full of rules and secrets. She knew how to serve tea, how to keep her mouth shut at the table, how to smile when her father spoke of marrying her off to a stranger as if she were a prize calf. But in that cabin, none of those rules applied. Ayoka taught her to build a fire from damp wood, to clean a wound with pine resin, to stitch a tear in a boot without muttering curses. She never raised her voice, never questioned Naomi's clumsiness, never looked at her like she was a burden. And one night, as the wind howled against the shutters like a wounded beast, Naomi found herself laughing for the first time in months. Just a small thing. She had spilled the water bucket trying to help, and it soaked her socks. She sat down hard, cursing through her teeth. And when she looked up, Ayoka was smiling. A real smile. one that reached her eyes. They laughed together in that warm orange light, and for a moment the world outside didn't exist. But joy, like firelight, casts shadows. Later that night, Naomi lay under the heavy quilt Ayoka had draped over her, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't or wouldn't name. Why am I still here? The storm had passed. Her body had healed. She could have left. She should have. But something about the way Ayoka moved through the world, without apology, without pretending, called to a place in Naomi that had never been touched. It terrified her, and it thrilled her, because love in the wilderness doesn't wear perfume or lace. It smells like smoke. It sounds like silence, and it shows itself in the way someone brushes snow off your shoulders without saying a word. Naomi had been promised to a man she didn't know. That was duty. What she was feeling now, that was something else. The next morning, as she fetched kindling outside, her boot sank into a hidden patch of snow, and she stumbled. Ayoka was there before she could fall. Their hands met, glove to glove. But Naomi didn't pull away, neither did she. It lasted less than a second, but it changed everything. There, in that breath between winter and thaw, between safety and shame, a question bloomed between them, louder than the wind. What if we weren't supposed to run from this? What if we weren't wrong? What if? This is love. But in the West, love like that doesn't stay hidden for long. And the snow, no matter how deep, always melts, revealing the tracks beneath. If the world tells you your love is a sin, do you kill it to survive? Or keep it alive, even if it kills you? These are not questions you ask in parlors. These are the kind you whisper to yourself at night, when the fire's low and the wind outside sounds like something crying through the pines. And in that cabin, where every breath fogged the air and every heartbeat felt louder than the storm, Naomi Cutter found herself asking that question again and again. By the third week, the snow had stopped falling, but she hadn't left. She told herself it was still too cold, that the pass might be frozen over, that it wasn't safe. But deep down, she knew better. She wasn't trapped by weather. She was trapped by the look in Ayoka's eyes when she handed her tea, by the weight of silence between them when their fingers touched for too long while passing a bowl, by the aching, dangerous warmth blooming in her chest every time Ayoka smiled, with just one side of her mouth. That kind of silence is louder than any preacher's sermon. And the cabin, it started to feel like a world of its own. No clocks, no men, no judgment. Just two women and the rituals of winter. Chop wood, heat broth, tend wounds, and try not to stare too long when the other undressed by the fire. One night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She got up, wrapped a shawl tight around her shoulders, and stepped outside. The snow reflected the moonlight like silver dust. The trees were still. The whole world felt like it was holding its breath. Ayoka stood a few yards away, barefoot in the snow, arms lifted to the stars. Her lips moved softly, chanting, praying, something Naomi couldn't understand. Her skin glowed in the moonlight, hair loose and wild. She looked like she belonged to another world. Naomi should have gone back inside, but she didn't. She watched, and she felt it. Not just attraction, not just admiration, but longing. The kind that starts deep in the bones. The kind you can't explain without tears or sin. When Ayoka turned and saw her, she didn't flinch. She lowered her arms and just stared. The silence between them stretched thin. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," Naomi whispered. Ayoka stepped closer. You're doing what you feel. Naomi shook her head. What I feel would get us both hanged in some towns. Ayoka didn't argue. She just looked at her with those eyes, calm, fierce, steady. Then she said, Do you want to live the way they told you, or the way your heart does? Naomi opened her mouth, but no answer came. Only the sound of her own pulse and the cold creeping up her legs. Because what kind of woman leaves behind everything, name, safety, family reputation, for a love that has no place in the world? The kind of woman who finally knows what real love feels like. They went back inside without speaking, but something had shifted. The next morning, Naomi woke to a folded note beside her blanket. It was written in careful, unsure English. If you go, I will not stop you. If you stay, I will not ask you why. That was the moment Naomi realized how deeply she'd already fallen. No man had ever given her a choice. Not her father, not the preacher, not the rancher who sent letters with dollar signs between every line. But Ayoka had. And choice, real choice, was terrifying. Later that day, Naomi helped gather kindling in the woods. They worked side by side, boots crunching softly in the snow, hands red from the cold. At one point, Ayoka paused. You've been quiet. Naomi looked down. I'm scared. Ayoka nodded, not asking why. Naomi swallowed hard. My mother died when I was 13. She used to hum while cooking, real soft. I didn't realize how much I missed that sound until you started doing the same. Ayoka's breath caught just a little. Naomi added, I think I stopped living that day. Just started doing what I was told. I never knew something could feel good and wrong at the same time. There was a long pause. Then Ayoka whispered, It's only wrong to them. They walked in silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Less like hiding, more like holding hands in the dark. But peace never lasts in the mountains. That night, a hawk cry echoed through the trees, not natural, not wild. A signal. Ayoka's eyes darkened. She locked the door, doused the fire, pulled Naomi close. Then she whispered, They found me. And just like that, the dream fractured. The world Naomi had known was waiting outside, armed, righteous, and cruel. And she would have to decide. Would she choose honor, or love, family, or the woman who gave her a new name without saying a word? If standing by love means standing alone, would you still do it? That's not a question folks ask in town halls or Sunday services, but it's the kind that rattles in your chest when you hear boots crunching snow outside a cabin you've come to call home. When you feel the breath of someone you love rise and fall beside you, steady, calm, while the world beyond your door sharpens its knives. That night, Naomi didn't sleep. Neither did Ayoka. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table, the fire long since doused, oil lamp turned low. The silence between them felt like a third person in the room, an unwelcome guest they couldn't shake. Ayoka was sharpening her blade, slow, even strokes, not out of panic but preparation. Naomi watched her hands, steady and worn, then looked at her own, trembling, pale, unready. Who are they? Naomi finally asked, though her voice barely left her throat. Ayoka didn't look up. Men who trade blood for coin. I knew they'd come eventually, but I didn't think I'd care what they found. Naomi's voice cracked, and now Ayoka stopped the blade, looked up. Her eyes were so still they made Naomi feel like a child again, reckless, soft, frightened of everything. Now, Ayoka said, they'd take something I wasn't supposed to have. You. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't romantic. It was truth. Raw, unwrapped, and dangerous. Naomi could hardly breathe. She'd come west to escape a name, a man, a life she never wanted. But somewhere along the way, she'd found something more terrifying than marriage. Love without permission. Ahyoka stood, pulled a faded blanket from a chest in the corner, and draped it over Naomi's shoulders. "You don't have to stay," she whispered. "They won't hurt you. You're not the one they want." Naomi flinched like she'd been slapped. "Don't say that. It's the truth." "I don't care." "You should." Naomi stood now, heart pounding so hard it hurt her ribs. "I've spent my whole life doing what I should. I should have smiled more. I should have married that rancher. I should have looked away when I first saw you standing in the snow." Ahyoka turned away, silent. Naomi stepped closer, but I didn't. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the cabin like the whisper of ghosts. "Tell me not to love you," Naomi said. "Tell me this is a mistake, and I'll walk away. I'll go marry a man with calloused hands and a fine house and spend my life pretending I don't dream about you every night." Ahyoka didn't answer, because she couldn't lie. Naomi reached for her hand, and this time, Ahyoka didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She just closed her eyes, leaned her forehead against Naomi's, and breathed. 1 breath. 2. And in that space between them, the world finally went quiet. What happened next didn't need words. The fire remained dark, but the warmth that filled the cabin didn't come from wood or flame. It came from skin against skin. From the trembling way Naomi touched her, like she wasn't sure if this would be the first time or the last. From the way Ahyoka traced the scar on Naomi's shoulder without asking where it came from, because she already understood. Love in exile is never soft. It is desperate, brave. It is two people choosing each other in the face of 1,000 reasons not to. Later, Naomi lay awake beside her, tangled in furs, heart too full to speak. She stared at the ceiling, trying to memorize the shape of the beams, the smell of pine sap, the sound of Ahyoka breathing, because they both knew peace like this didn't last. Dawn came too fast. The first sign was the silence of the birds, then the tracks by the creek, fresh, deep, wide. Boot prints. Not one pair. 3, maybe 4. Ahyoka spotted them first. She didn't panic, just nodded once. "It's time." Naomi's throat closed. "To run?" Ahyoka shook her head. "To choose." And that word, choose, hit like a bullet, because Naomi had been raised in a world that told her love was a thing handed to her, assigned, arranged. She wasn't supposed to choose it, especially not this. But now she had no other option. They packed quick. Bread, knife, compass, water skin, the blanket they'd shared. Naomi reached for her Bible but stopped. Let it rest on the shelf like a farewell. As they stepped outside, the wind hit them like a slap. The air was too still, too expectant. Naomi grabbed Ahyoka's hand. "I don't know where we're going," she said. Ahyoka looked back. "We're not going anywhere. Not yet." Naomi froze. "What?" "They're here, and I won't run any more." Naomi's stomach dropped. "You'd die for this," she whispered. Ahyoka's voice didn't waver. "No, but I'll fight for it." Naomi's hand trembled in hers, not from cold, from knowing that, for the first time in her life, she would stand not behind someone, but with them, for love, for defiance, for the fire they built together in the middle of a world that had no name for it but shame. If someone called your love a crime, would you still defend it with your life? That's not a question for the faint-hearted. It's not something you answer with a nod at a dinner table, or with a polite smile in church. It's something that lives in your chest like a fire no one else can see. Something that eats away at your silence until there's nothing left but your heartbeat. And the choice. Ayoka had made hers. Naomi was about to. The tracks were real, deep, fresh. A man's stride, then another. 4 sets total, boots with hard edges. Government issue. No doubt about it. They were bounty hunters. Men who traded violence for pay and had no use for the truth if the price was right. Ayoka stood on the ridge with her rifle slung over one shoulder, watching the horizon. Calm. Still. Like the storm was inside her now. Naomi, behind her, could barely breathe. She looked at the footprints in the snow and felt her throat tighten. These weren't just men. They were reminders of everything she'd run from. Her father's voice, loud and full of shame. The preacher's words about hellfire. The rancher's hand on her back like he already owned her. This was what waited for her beyond Devil's Pass. And yet, she couldn't go back. Ayoka turned slightly. You don't have to be here. Naomi blinked. You keep saying that. Because it's true. Naomi stepped forward. And if I leave and they kill you, what then? I get to survive, but empty. Ayoka looked down. You'd survive. Naomi's voice rose, but I wouldn't be me anymore. Silence. Then Ayoka said softly, I used to think love was a weakness. Naomi furrowed her brow. Ayoka continued, eyes still fixed on the trees below. They taught me that it makes you soft, vulnerable, that it gets people killed. But they were wrong. Love is the only thing I've ever known worth fighting for. Naomi moved to stand beside her. They didn't hold hands. Not now. Not when every second might be their last. But they didn't need to. The forest below rustled. A hawk cried. And then came the faint crunch. Boots on ice. They were close. Ayoka moved first. Down the ridge, silent as a shadow. Naomi followed, adrenaline burning through her skin like wildfire. They reached the trees just as the first man came into view, big, barrel-chested, with a revolver at his hip and a bounty slip in his coat. He was reading it as he walked, like he didn't even care to remember her name. Just the price. Behind him, 3 others fanned out. One carried a shotgun. One had rope. Naomi's breath caught. They weren't here to ask questions. Ayoka stepped out from behind the tree, rifle raised. Turn around. The men stopped, laughed. You're the one with the price on her head? The lead man asked. You don't look like much. Ayoka didn't blink. You've already made one mistake. Don't make another. The man raised his hand slowly, signaling the others. We don't have to shoot you, sweetheart. Just need to bring you in. Dead or alive. Your choice. Naomi stepped out next. Unarmed, trembling, but she stepped. She's not going anywhere with you. The man blinked. Who the hell are you? I'm the one who's not letting you touch her. There was a beat of silence, the kind that tastes like blood and fear. Then the man laughed again. Well, I'll be damned. 2 doves in the same nest. What a sight. He reached for his gun, and then everything happened fast. Ayoka fired. The man dropped, screaming. The one with the rope lunged. Naomi didn't think. She threw herself at him, knocking him into the snow. They struggled, fists flying. Naomi tasted iron, saw red. A second shot rang out, then a third. Then silence. Just wind. Just breath. And then Ayoka knelt beside her, pulling Naomi upright, brushing the blood from her cheek. You all right? Naomi nodded, barely. Her whole body shook. 3 men lay in the snow. One moaned. too didn't move. Ayoka stood slowly. They'll send more. Naomi leaned into her, whispering, Then we don't run any more. We disappear. Ayoka met her eyes, and something passed between them. Something final. Not an ending, but a vow. If love makes you an outlaw, would you still call it holy? That question came to me years later, long after the scars had faded and the names had changed, long after the snow had melted off the mountain, but it still echoes sometimes, when the wind cuts sharp through the trees, or when I see a cabin standing alone against the sky, and remember what it meant to belong to someone in secret, because love, when it's forbidden, doesn't leave you untouched. It mocks you. Not with shame, no. With clarity. The snow didn't last forever. By late March, the ice began to drip from the eaves of the cabin, falling like slow tears to the earth. The pine needles peeked out again, and the sun started to feel warm instead of cruel. The world outside stirred, and so did we. We buried the bodies deep, marked nothing, said no prayers. There were no trials, no judges, no headlines, just silence. Just the kind of justice the mountains offer, raw, cold, and final. Ayoka didn't speak much in the days that followed. She spent long hours carving a new bow, cleaning weapons, packing supplies. Naomi helped, quietly, like breath filling the spaces between two ribs. They didn't speak of what happened. Not right away. Not of blood or gun smoke, or the look in the last man's eyes when he realized he'd underestimated a woman who had already lost too much to lose again. But they did speak of after. Where would we go? Naomi asked one evening as they sat by the fire, knees rushing. Ayoka stared into the flames. South, across the river, into the desert. Places where names don't follow and folks mind their own business. Naomi nodded slowly. Will we ever stop running? Ayoka turned to her. We stop when you say so. And in that moment, Naomi realized something terrifying. She didn't want to run. She didn't want to hide. But she would, if it meant keeping what they'd found. Because she hadn't just fallen in love. She had built a new life, with her own hands, out of ash and fear and something stronger than either. One morning they burned the cabin, not out of anger, but necessity. Smoke rose high into the blue, a signal to the sky, a goodbye to a shelter that had kept their secrets too well. They walked west, then south, past riverbeds, through valleys, over peaks too narrow to cross on horseback. They followed no map, only instinct and stars. At night, Naomi curled close to Ayoka beneath blankets that still smelled like smoke and winter. In the silence, she would trace the shape of her shoulder blade, count the breaths between them, and wonder how something so impossible had become the only thing that felt true. There were towns where they pretended to be sisters, places where they said little, bought what they needed, and moved on before the questions grew teeth. There were nights where they slept with knives close and boots on, and mornings where Naomi woke up aching, not from fear, but from the ache of a love that had no name and nowhere to settle. But it was real, it was theirs. And isn't that what love is supposed to be? Not perfect, not safe, not even welcome. Just true. They finally settled near a canyon where the river cut deep and the sky stretched wide. A place no map bothered to name. They built a new cabin, smaller, tighter. No front door lock because no one ever came. Naomi planted herbs. Ayoka hunted. They laughed more, slept better, and slowly the fear faded. One spring evening, years later, Naomi found herself watching Ayoka hang clothes to dry. Her hair streaked with gray, hands still rough, eyes still sharp. And Naomi thought, "This is the kind of life I never would have had if I'd chosen the path they laid for me." She stepped out, barefoot in the dirt, walked across the yard, and touched Ayoka's wrist. "When I was a girl," she whispered, "I thought love was something that came in the mail, in letters, in boxes, that it wore a ring and came with a father's permission." Ayoka smiled. "And now?" Naomi looked around at the garden, the wind, the sky. "Now I know it comes in fire and frost, and choosing it again every day, no matter who tries to take it away." They stood there a while, hands clasped, hearts steady, because they had chosen love over honor, over safety, over everything the world told them they should be, and somehow they had survived. So, if you ever find yourself in Devil's Pass, when the snow melts and the wildflowers bloom, you might hear a whisper through the pines. Not a ghost, not a warning, just a question carried on the wind. If you had to choose between honor and love, which would you choose? And maybe, just maybe, you'll know your answer. Because we did. We still do.